Good morning, Nolan Bowerly, Bitcoiner, here in Lisbon again, episode 9 of The Breakup. Welcome, everyone. Make sure I got my eyes in the camera. I've been rewatching my stuff to make sure that I try to make the production quality a little better. I've been going step by step here. Right now, I'm just trying to sort of systemically get used to doing this every single day and making it so that it's not a burden, right? So I'm just giving you sort of stories that stuck out to me this morning. And today we got a great episode. We're going to be talking a lot about the money news that happened yesterday. All kinds of stuff has happened from the Federal Reserve that you might not have noticed. And we're going to contrast it with some other news in energy, and we're going to sort of propose a pretty interesting conclusion and prediction around Bitcoin at the end of it. So let's get started. Today, or yesterday, another Federal Reserve, I'll get the name, another Federal Reserve chairman or member of the board named Randall Quarles stepped down. This is the fourth top-ranking official at the Federal Reserve to drop out and resign since the Biden administration took over. Pretty interesting stuff. Now, some folks are suggesting that there's a brewing pivot to change the mandate of the Federal Reserve to get much more involved in public policy, social policy, particularly energy matrix questions around sustainable energy sources like solar and wind. So a lot of people are chatting about that stuff. And an interesting piece came out yesterday so put that in context. You've got several members of the Federal Reserve who've resigned. You've also got a bit of, another piece of news in the Federal Reserve yesterday is they did admit that the Chinese real estate might pose contagion, but I'm not going to go too much farther today. I just offer that as update on what's going on that end. So incoming risks from China, according to the Federal Reserve. And I think they're right about that, right? I don't think that's something that they might have tempered their worry earlier, but at least now they're admitting this is something real and they got to take a look at it. And you could feel the pinch here in America because of choices that were made in China. And of course, the Chinese choices were heavily predicated, especially the real estate stuff, on the relationship with the Federal Reserve in the United States, because of course they were one of the great buyers of American treasuries and 30-year bonds and 20-year bonds and 10-year bonds, and basically anything the Federal Reserve was issuing, they went to China first and said, "Hey, have a look." And that's been, something that's quite public. So I don't think we're pretty aware of how much the Chinese keep on the balance sheet of Federal Reserve instruments, and it's a tremendous number. So they're admitting the truth. Great. Not admitting their role in it, the stuff I've just mentioned, but admitting that some stuff happened in China and it might hurt here. But that's not the important piece today. The important piece today is the OCC, the Office of the Controller of the Currency. So not related to the Federal Reserve necessarily, but an organ of the federal government. And we used to have a great one in that job for Bitcoin anyway. It was someone who had been at Coinbase and then went to the Office of the Controller of the Currency. And he's the person who last summer, in the summer of 2020, stated something really obvious and said, look, we're going on about all these difficulties that cryptocurrency businesses, banks, custodians have in custodying Bitcoin because it's a novel technology and it's not the same as stuff we're used to storing and protecting. And what he came out and said is, look, we've been doing this for years, right? We have safety deposit boxes. It's all the same. These are keys. And this guy he ended up going to Binance and becoming the head of Binance USA, but he quit real quick. I think he's landed in another one of these sort of heavily connected Bitcoin crypto things. So I'm not worried about him. But it's the new one I'm worried about, Sol Omarova. And here's an interesting story. I guess she's Russian or something. I don't know. Born there. She's got an accent. Sounds Russian. I was in Russia in 2003. 2003. And I met a student of economics. I was a student at the time, and I met an economics student. And, I had a fairly, broad education in economics as they were taught in the late 90s and early 2000s. And, I met this girl who was, a university student at the top at Moscow University or whatever, the top place to go. And she told me already then, the only thing they learned about in their economic schools was Marxism. Still, right? Communism had fallen for 12 years by then, but they still lacked almost all literature on economics that was useful. They had no concept of Adam Smith, and I mean, they had heard about him, but it was not something that was part of the lectures. They were still lecturing the same lessons they had under Soviet Union. They hadn't changed them in the faculties, which is insane. And she said, it's a bullshit education. I'm not learning anything. It's all communist stuff and da da da. And I think this woman, Sol Omarova, has come from the same background. I mean, it looks like she has the same education, and I mean, she might have gone to grad school. I don't know her academic history. I don't care. I think she's pretty boring, and um, but I'm going to mention her here because of the crazy thing she said yesterday. Wait till you hear this. So so she gives an interview saying, so she's in this role, Office of the Controller of the Currency, and they're now asking about energy, right? Energy. Um, and she makes a prediction that the policies that she'll enact will lead to the following result. She said smaller players in oil and gas, they want them to go bankrupt, right? They want them to go bankrupt. She said it. Of course, we want them to go bankrupt. She said, of course, we want them to go bankrupt. And so I don't think she misspoke or was being uh, trying to be hand wavy, or we're inferring more from it than what she said, and she meant it in a limited sense. I think she meant what she said. She wants them to go bankrupt. And so it's an amazing thing. And when we go back to that idea of social policy, when we go back to this idea of the Federal Reserve members leaving, I mean, why are they leaving, right? Are they truly going to get more involved in energy discussions? It looks like it. One of the things, so you've got one person saying, Office of the Controller of the Currency, a lot of powers of the commercial banks will be under her purview, saying, these oil and gas guys, I don't care if they go bankrupt, right? Then you've got the actual creators of that money, the Federal Reserve, looking like they're pivoting to this moral role where they're going to promote ESG, solar, and wind. And one of the tools at their disposal is eminent domain. It looks like, I think it'll come out of the OCC because it'll have to come out of the federal government, but the Federal Reserve uh, might be involved in using eminent domain to pump an industry. And that's what it looks like is going on here, which is incredible. Now, I want to put that in contrast. So you got the biggest country, the most important country economically in the world, running the uh, reserve currency of the world, stating they're about to take a huge policy pivot and embrace new forms of energy in order to promote social policies. So I don't think I'm not trying to overstate or understate or be hyperbolic about what they're saying. I don't want this to come across as, oh, look at these, look what they're saying they're doing. I'm just saying that I think this is pretty accurate. I don't want to mislead anyone that this is some revelation that I'm coming up with. I'm connecting a few dots, but I think with straight lines, and I don't think we're spinning around in circles in order to make these connections. I see Office of the Controller of the Currency will be heavily influential in commercial banking, stating they have social policy objectives. I see Federal Reserve members leaving their posts, and a lot of conversation, a lot of buzz around a pivot, and a lot of signals that ESG is and policy objectives are part of the Federal Reserve's um, perhaps changing mandate. Perhaps changing mandate. So I want to take these things and I want to contrast them, the money and the energy and American policy, with what we're seeing elsewhere in the world. And I'm going to use the example of France. France being one of these sort of nimble countries that might be able to really shake things up. I think the bitterness about the submarine loss might have provoked a lot of independent thinking over in France, and perhaps some soul searching. I don't want to go too long into the submarine deal, but what I saw there is America not saying they're not going to guarantee a safe route for France to even get to Australia in the first place for those submarines. I think there's a great feeling that the Indian Ocean is not going to be an American controlled waterway any longer. So there's not a lot of straight lines for France to go into to get to Australia, but that's neither here nor there. I don't want to spend too much on that. That's complete speculation of mine, really. But you never know. What I want to talk to you is about what the president of France did yesterday, which was announce that they're going to build nuclear. They're going to go crazy and they're going to build all the nuclear reactors they could possibly use. And one of the things that I saw even yesterday, before the announcement by the French president, was a plan to build some of these smaller scale nuclear reactors in factories and deliver them to users. And I've always been bullish on Bitcoin's capacity, Bitcoin miners' capacity to be a market and a buyer um, of those factory-made small Gen 4 nuclear reactors, and that's going to change the world. I mean, really. And let's explain why. Let's explain why that's going to be such a big change. So it looks like America is sort of uh, um, pouring concrete into this plan of pivoting banking policy and money policy and Federal Reserve policy to solving energy matrix questions. Right? They're gonna put oil and gas out of business, small players, and use eminent domain to get the infrastructure needed to use wind and solar. And what I see this leading to is not sort of that innovator's dilemma where America figures it out in this way and the money works and the energy works and then everyone else follows. What I actually see is them sort of hanging themselves here. Um, when a country like France, a small country, but with the wherewithal to do these things, the ability to be this nimble, supplying these nuclear reactors to private interests and to the people, they're going to greatly influence the preponderance of nuclear in the world, thereby basically making all solar and wind not obsolete, but way less interesting, way less useful, way less needed, and probably cuts the knees out of all of this eminent domain need and all the land they're going to require to produce this energy. But what this ends up doing is um, a worry that we have in Bitcoin, right? A worry that we have in Bitcoin, a worry that most Bitcoiners have is that Bitcoin is going to be used by the US Federal Reserve, corporate media, you name it, um, in order to blame Bitcoin for the cause of collapsing confidence in the US dollar. So, in a world where the US dollar collapses, you know, maybe, right? Maybe. But if the confidence in the US dollar collapses, right, who's to blame? Who's to blame, right? Currently, it looks like Bitcoin would make a really good scapegoat. And so there's that worry. But here's what happens. Here's what happens if this energy matrix changes, right? If Bitcoin and Bitcoiners are able to buy nuclear reactors and begin to own their own massive sources of energy, and to close the loop in the end on paying electrical bills to utilities in dollars and sort of relieving Bitcoin of its last sort of open-ended market where it has to cover those electrical bills in fiat and usually not Bitcoin. So so what you'll have is um, almost I think if Bitcoin is successful on this, you will neutralize this argument that Bitcoin caused the crisis in confidence. Because in the end, Bitcoin is going to couple with better energy, right? What I see here is the US dollar coupling with terrible policies and stupid ideas and moronic sources of energy. And I think it's going to be clear to people then, despite the ability to massively persuade with media, I think it's going to be clear to folks at that point when they couple with these wrong energy sources, I think it's going to be clear to folks why we lost confidence in the U.S. dollar. It's going to be wind power. It's currently it's the navies, right? Currently it's the sheer force of American military the sheer size of the American energy matrix, the amount of oil produced, protected, secured around the world, right? These are the things that make the US dollar so amazing, right? So amazing. Um, but by coupling with energy and reshaping the matrix, the US dollar is um, it's a little bit like playing with the things that made you great in the first place, right? You're going back and it's like a, you know, it's more than changing a mission statement or a logo or a brand, right? They're changing the recipe. They're changing the cocktail that made it successful. And when I see countries like France take this opportunity to say we're going to embrace the technology that to everyone seems obvious as the solution to all of our problems with climate change, and I believe that if you don't see that nuclear power is the answer to all climate change, you need to spend a lot of time learning about what's going on in nuclear, um, and then make an opinion about uh, wind's potential and solar's potential and the need for them even. So a really important exercise that everyone can take. But the point here is, in the end, Bitcoin will couple with better energy, and the confidence that people have in Bitcoin will be built on the knowledge that there's this many joules, there's this much energy, and in the end, I guess the way I see it going forward is even psychologically, right? You know, we read all of these ridiculous propaganda from every country in the world. America, oh, the economy grew this much, da da da. All these numbers mean nothing, right? What we want to see one day, I believe we'll see it. We will not measure the wealth of the world in Bitcoin. I don't think. Well, in a way, we will. You know, individual wealth and da da da. I guess you could say we won't measure the growth of the economy in Bitcoin, is maybe a better way to say it. What we'll do then is measure the growth of our energy production, right, as a proxy for the economy, because it's the amount of energy we're using, it's the amount of energy consuming, it's the amount of energy that is required for human life, distributed and used by all people. So at that point, once the amount of energy per person goes up, because the capacity of nuclear will allow that for us, I think we're going to be in a place where people can really understand progress if things are better this year than last year. And the terms of the economy, the psychology of the economy will be accessible to everyone, right? More energy this year, great year in the world. A little less energy this year. What was it? What was the reason? Um, maybe it was a volcano or a natural disaster or several other reasons. But what we do know is psychologically, Bitcoin has a major advantage because it is embracing much simpler metrics to understand productivity, wealth, and the things that will help us decipher what's useful and what isn't. And right now, the OCC seems quite useless to me, anyway. All right, everyone, that's it for this episode. See you again tomorrow. I'm in Lisbon for a few more days, but looking forward to getting back and seeing everyone at home. Thanks for your time, everyone.